In the far east of Muah Hills, there lived a man named Bondia. He was just like any other farmer. He had 4 wives and 20 children. His life was simple. He tilled his land, took care of his family, and joined in the celebrations whenever there was a village event. In these celebrations, people would come together to feast, drink, and laugh under the wide sky. One day, an evil idea crept into Bondia's mind. After the parties were over, there were always leftover bones, scraps of food, and things no one wanted. Most people would leave it behind, thinking little of it, but not Bondia. He saw something in those leftover bones, something he believed had power. He thought he could connect with those who ate the bones, sacrifice them, and gain wealth. He wanted to be extraordinarily influential and powerful in the village. While the village was fast asleep, Bondia would sneak into the places where the celebrations had taken place. He would gather some bones to his home. There, in the quiet of the night, he would begin his strange rituals. He would mix the bones with herbs, whispering words that no one understood. These weren't ordinary rituals. They were dark, secret, and powerful. As time passed, people started to notice something odd. Bondia's crops grew bigger and stronger than anyone else's. His cattle multiplied like magic. He became wealthier and wealthier, his family's house growing larger and more beautiful with each passing day. But it wasn't just the wealth that made people whisper. It was the way he got it. They began to wonder, how could a simple farmer like Bondia become so rich, so fast? But what the villagers didn't know was that Bondia's success was not because of his hard work or good luck. It was the bones. He used the leftover bones in rituals. They gave him power. He believed that using this power could make him the richest man in the hills. However, with his rise in wealth came a dark cloud over the village. People started getting sick. Not just a cold or fever, but strange illnesses no one could explain. And worse, people began to disappear. One by one, they vanished mysteriously. Some said they were taken by the spirits of the hills, while others believed something far worse was at play. The villagers grew scared. They couldn't ignore the bad things happening anymore. And slowly, the rumors started to spread. People whispered that Bondia's rise to power wasn't just from good farming. It was from something darker. Some even said that the bones he collected were cursed and that he had been performing evil rituals, using them to bring death to the village in exchange for his wealth. The celebrations grew quieter. The laughter started to disappear. No one dared speak out against Bondia, but fear filled the air. They knew something was wrong, but no one could prove it. Bondia, however, didn't stop. He grew bolder with his power. His hunger for wealth and status never satisfied. The more he participated in these events like burials, traditional marriages, and also end-of-year celebrations in the village square, the more wealth he gained. As the days passed, the people of Muah Hills began to notice something unsettling. Bondia's rituals, which were once a mystery, seemed to have a terrible price. One particular Christmas, Bondia gathered everyone around. He looked around the compound with a proud smile on his face and told them his plans. He was going to run for political office. He wanted to become the member of parliament. The room went quiet as the villagers listened. Bondia, full of confidence, spoke of how he could bring even more prosperity to the area. He claimed that with his wisdom and wealth, he could change the whole region, bringing developments to his home area. The villagers didn't know what to say. They knew better than to speak against him in front of everyone, especially not when he was so powerful. So they clapped, smiled, and said they would support him. But deep down, many of them were filled with doubt and fear. They knew that they could not support. After this announcement, people met in the village town and whispered among themselves. "We can't support him," they said. "How could we? He's the one who has caused so many deaths in this village and the neighboring villages. He's responsible for the disappearances. He has killed people. How can we stand behind someone like that?" But when they were near him, they hid their true feelings and pretended to be loyal. They didn't want to anger him, especially not in front of everyone. Bondia, however, didn't notice the discomfort. He thought that their smiles and cheers were real. He believed that the villagers were truly on his side. But the truth was, many of them were scared. They were afraid to speak up, but they could never fully support him. The villagers had seen too much. People disappearing, strange illnesses, and the eerie feeling that Bondia had something to do with it all. How could they trust him? How could they follow him? The elders, who had once been respected leaders, started to meet in secrets. They were worried, their minds heavy with the weight of the situation. The elders had seen it all. The strange illnesses, the people who vanished without a trace, the mysterious exhaustion that fell upon villagers who could never explain where they had been or what they had done. They knew Bondia was behind it all, and they couldn't pretend otherwise. The elders smiled, though their smiles were not happy ones. They knew they had to stand together, even if it meant going against Bondia. They couldn't allow him to take control of their future, even if that meant risking their own safety. They had lived long enough to understand that sometimes the greatest threat comes not from outside, but from within. Bondia, with his power and wealth, had become the greatest threat to their village. "We cannot support him," one elder said, his voice filled with conviction. "It is time we find a way to stop him before it is too late." One elder, who had seen much in his time, spoke up. "Even the villagers know what Bondia has done. They know he is responsible for the deaths, the disappearances, and the strange labor in his fields at night. How can we support a man like that?" His voice was calm but firm. The others nodded in agreement. The other elders agreed. They knew they had to act and agreed to start campaign against Bondia. They couldn't stay silent any longer. The village's future was at stake, and they couldn't allow fear to silence them. During his campaign, Bondia grew even more powerful. He knew that to win, he needed the support of the youths, so he paid them handsomely to push for his agenda. He moved from village to village, from one location to the next, gathering and paying crowds to chant his name. Everywhere he went, the young people cheered, shouting, "Bondia, Bondia, you are our leader." They believed they were supporting someone who could bring them wealth and opportunity, someone who had risen from humble beginnings to power. But deep down, many of them knew the truth. They knew that Bondia wasn't the man he pretended to be. He wasn't a savior. He was a monster, and they could feel it. They had heard the stories, the whispers that spread through the villages about the terrible things he had done in Mua village. His rise to power had been built on fear, on manipulation, and on the suffering of others. They understood that if Bondia were to win and get into power, he would devour everyone. No one would be safe. He would use his power to control, to punish, and to destroy anyone who stood in his way. But still, they were caught up in the excitement of the campaign, the money he offered, and the promises of what he could do for them. As Bondia's campaign spread, so did the bad news from Mua village. Stories of death, disappearances, and the strange happenings in his fields began to reach the other villages. Mua village elders worked hard. It was working. The villagers who had once been afraid to speak out now found their voices. Things began to change. Bondia's one solid grip on the people started to slip. The more people heard about his past, the more they started to question their support. Fear began to replace the excitement. Even the youths who had once cheered for him in the streets started to have doubts. The money he had given them now felt like a trap, a way to buy their loyalty and silence their consciences. And then, as Bondia moved from one village to the next, trouble followed. The more he traveled, the more the rumors about him grew. His once unstoppable momentum began to falter. People began to fear what would happen if he actually gained power, what he would do to them, to their families, to their future. They had seen the signs of his cruelty, and they couldn't ignore it any longer. The situation started to unravel for Bondia. The support he had once enjoyed began to crumble. Villagers who had been silent now spoke up. The whispers turned to open discussions. And as the bad news about his past spread, the campaign that had once seemed so strong began to weaken. Finally, election day arrived. Bondia had poured everything he had into his campaign. He had used his wealth, his influence, and his control over the youths, believing that once he secured the position, everything would fall into place. He believed that once he became a member of parliament, he could recover his losses, gain even more power, and continue his dark rise. He dreamed of moving abroad, leaving behind the village that had seen the worst of him, and living a life of luxury with his family, free from the consequences of his past. But when the election results were announced, everything he had hoped for shattered. Bondia's name appeared last on the list of candidates. Out of the 4 contestants, he was the last one. His worst nightmare had come true. After all the money he had spent, all the manipulation, and all the promises of power, he had failed. The villagers had seen through him. They had rejected him despite all his efforts. They had seen the darkness that lay beneath the surface of his wealth and charm. Bondia sat there, stunned. His mind raced. How could this happen? He had done everything right, or so he thought. He had used all his resources that were now gone. His wealth had been drained, his influence had crumbled, and his hopes for a better life were nothing but dust. He had nothing left to turn to. Anger boiled inside him, burning hotter than anything he had ever felt before. His pride, his dreams of power, and his belief that he was untouchable had all come crashing down. Bondia was furious. His eyes narrowed, his fists clenched, and his mind filled with thoughts of revenge. He had lost everything. The power he had fought so hard to gain, the wealth he had built with blood and fear, was gone. He was no longer the man he had once been, the man everyone feared and respected. He was just a failure now, a man with nothing, no one to turn to. Bondia's world crumbled quickly after the election results. The lavish lifestyle he had dreamed of was now a distant memory. The resources he had used to fuel his campaign were gone, leaving him broke. His influence, once strong and feared, coiled into nothing. The villagers who had once whispered his name in fear now turned their backs on him. The elders who had once respected him now ignored him. His power, the very thing he had once relied on, had disappointed him in the worst way possible. In the depths of his despair, Bondia tried to end it all. Twice he attempted suicide, each time feeling like there was no way out. The darkness that surrounded him was overwhelming. But his attempts didn't bring the peace he longed for. Instead, news of his failed attempts spread quickly through the village. People, surprisingly, felt a sense of relief, even joy. They were glad to see him suffer. For so long, he had made their lives miserable, and now, they thought, justice was being served. Some even wished he would die, feeling that the pain he had caused them would only end with his death. But not everyone felt that way. When Mr. Amos, the village pastor, heard the news, he was deeply saddened. He knew the pain Bondia had caused, but he also knew that no one was beyond redemption. Pastor Amos, a kind and gentle man, went to Bondia's home to speak to him. He found Bondia broken, alone, and on the edge of despair. "Bondia," Pastor Amos said softly, sitting beside him, "God is love. He loves you even now. You have done many bad things, but that does not define you. If you turn to him, he will forgive you. He will restore what you've lost. He will bless you if you give your life to him." Bondia looked at the pastor, his eyes filled with emptiness. He had never known kindness like this before. For the first time in a long while, he felt something other than anger and bitterness. He felt hope, a glimmer of something better, something that might change the course of his life. That day, Bondia made a decision. He chose to give his life to Christ. He repented for the wrongs he had done and accepted the forgiveness through Jesus that Pastor Amos offered. He found a new purpose, one that was rooted in faith and love, not power and greed. The man who had once been a symbol of fear and darkness was now a man of God. Bondia's transformation was not immediate, but it was real. He began to study the Bible, to pray, and to live according to the teachings of Christ. He became known as the Bondia of God, a man who had once sought power and wealth, but had now found peace and purpose in faith. As time passed, Bondia's life changed in ways he had never expected. He felt the blessings of God in his life again. He began preaching to the villagers, sharing his testimony of transformation, and telling others about the love and forgiveness he had found. His story spread to far villages, and soon he was holding crusades in the cities.